Hello and welcome to Run Testers. My name's Nick, and in this video we're going to be comparing the Brooks Hyperion Max and the Hoka Mach 5. So the Hyperion Max and the Hoka Mach 5 are both very lightweight, versatile training shoes that don't use any kind of plate, in contrast to lots of the options on the market. They're both geared slightly more towards fast running in terms of their product descriptions, but both of them can handle a nice range of runs. The Hyperion Max is the more expensive shoe. It's £160 in the UK, $170 in the US, whereas the Hoka Mach 5 is £130 or $145. The Hoka Mach 5 weighs in at 229 grams or 8.07 ounces in the UK size 9, whereas the Hyperion Max is even lighter than that. It's 217 grams or 7.65 ounces. The Hyperion Max has a drop of 8mm, whereas the Hoka Mach 5 has a 5mm drop. Both of them have got nice lightweight mesh uppers with a little bit of cushioning around the heel of the shoe and a heel counter in both, but otherwise the uppers are generally designed to be as lightweight as possible. They both use EVA in the midsole. With the Brooks, it's the nitrogen-infused DNA flash foam that Brooks uses across its Hyperion range, whereas with Hoka you've got a dual-density Profide Plus midsole with a slightly softer layer on top and a firmer layer beneath. That firmer bottom layer of EVA also acts as the outsole of the shoe, which doesn't have any rubber at all on it, whereas with the Brooks you are getting pretty decent rubber coverage on the key impact areas at the forefoot and heel there.
So I ran true to size in a UK 8.5 in both these shoes, and that's how I'd recommend it. I'd recommend going true to size. There's quite a similar fit in both. You've got close fitting uppers with good heel hold, good lockdown fit, decent padding in the heel collar. If anything, I think the Mach 5 hug a little bit more closely, a bit more snugly across the midfoot, and they're kind of narrow around the kind of toe knuckle bit. And there's a little less room into the toe box. I think the Hyperion Max offer a little bit more wiggle room, and there's definitely a little bit more room kind of across the top of the toes. So, you know, stop that kind of bashing in those black toenail situations.
So I found that both shoes fit me very well true to size. Despite appearances, I'd say that the Brooks Hyperion Max is the more roomy shoe in terms of the toe box. The Mach 5 has a fairly narrow fit around the front there. It's quite typical of Hoka shoes, but I'm someone with a narrow foot and it fits me really well. So yeah, I had no concerns with either shoe in my normal size.
I've done more miles in the Hoka Mach 5 than I have in the Brooks Hyperion Max, quite a few more in fact. But in terms of how I've tested them, I've put them through similar paces, similar distances on similar terrain, mainly roads, bit of tarmac, throwing in the odd kind of compacted river path, but they've basically been through the same tests. I also did that thing that I like to do where I take them both out for 1 mile wearing one shoe on one foot and one shoe on the other foot to see how they feel side by side, and here's what I found. So I've just done the 1 mile side by side run test, and again this is another really interesting one. The sensation of these shoes underfoot is incredibly similar. They feel incredibly similar on the foot. The ride is not, there's not a huge amount of distinction here when you're moving as well. I started slow and then I moved up through the gears a bit to the faster paces. And actually at the slower paces, there's not an awful lot to choose between these two shoes. The way they feel underfoot, I would say the Hoka Mach 5 feel a little bit kind of wider. There's a bit more shoe on the foot. The Hyperion Max feel a bit narrower, a bit more compact, maybe a shade more agile, but we're talking very marginal here. Overall, I think it goes to the same. You know, I think marginally here, the Hoka Mach 5 are a little better cushioned. There's a bit more of a soft landing bed. There's a bit more of a sort of wider, softer platform than you'll get from the Hyperion Max, but it's not huge. There's not a huge discrepancy there. And likewise, when you start to hit those top paces, I think the Hyperion Max kind of edge it in terms of having a little bit more kind of pop at the top pace. They roll through, and the transition and the spring and everything just feels a little bit more energetic at the very top pace when you're moving at your fastest than the Hoka Mach 5. But I think in terms of that kind of whole range of capability throughout that run, I think the Hoka Mach 5 just kind of edges it for me. On the foot, it just feels a little bit more comfortable. The foot is kind of cradled a bit more into that kind of softer footbed. They are a bit narrower, but there's a bit more of a hugging upper fit. There's one weird thing about the Hyperion Max, and it's basically that on the heel, that heel cutaway, if you land a bit further back, there's a little bit of sort of odd rolling. There's a little bit of stability issue at the back compared to the Hoka Mach 5. That Hoka Mach 5 is kind of consistent platform all the way across the bottom, whereas the Hyperion Max, for me anyway, there's just a little bit of an odd sort of sensation that I feel like my heel's rolling a little bit. It's more pronounced when I'm running slower or when I'm kind of landing a bit further back on my heels rather than up on my kind of mid to forefoot. But yeah, overall really interesting because there's margins between these two shoes, and what you could say is pretty much that Brooks have made a shoe to match the Hoka Mach 5 quite closely. Now, if I'm drawing a distinction between these two shoes, I've kind of sorted it out in my head like this. I think from the run tests I've done, I think the Mach 5 is is a better shoe at easier paces, at slower paces. It's better at that end of the spectrum. It can cope with kind of faster paces, and it does those quite well as well. But I think the Hyperion Max is actually better when you're doing those kind of all-out, shorter, faster runs than the Hoka Mach 5. The Hyperion Max just lacks, I think, a little bit of the cushioning protection to be, a good, easy shoe, whereas the Mach 5 can do that. And I think if I had to choose, I would rather run fast in the Hoka Mach 5 than I would run slow in the Brooks Hyperion Max, if that makes sense. And I think that sort of speaks to the overall versatility of the shoe. I think the Mach 5 is just a bit more of a versatile shoe. I think it has more kind of long mileage potential. For me, there's not much to choose between the comfort. In the ride, I think you could feel the rocker, I'd say sort of slightly more in the Brooks Hyperion Max. I think you definitely notice this sort of heel sort of cutaway here if you're landing a bit further back on your heel. It's not flat, but you've got a bit more of a kind of overall kind of flat ride, that you feel that kind of lower drop in the Hoka Mach 5. If you like a lower drop shoe, then this is the one to go for sure. There's a higher drop in the Brooks Hyperion Max. But yeah, basically for all out fast, the Hyperion Max. For anything from easy up to pretty fast, then I'd go Hoka Mach 5.
So the Mach 5 and indeed the Mach 4 before it has long been a favourite of mine and really the rest of the testers on the channel. It's just a really comfortable shoe that's very versatile to use for a nice range of different training runs. The ride is really smooth, with a nice rocker there. It's got a little bit of softness, but it's not overly squishy. It's not massively stacked either, so it's just a fairly nimble, lightweight shoe that is comfortable and just disappears on the foot and feels very natural at a really wide range of paces. So you can go out for just completely all-out easy recovery runs in this shoe comfortably. You can run long at a bit of pace. I've done tempo runs and high progression runs finishing at a marathon pace or faster in it, and it always just feels really good. You can also just take it down the track and do all-out intervals in it, but I think this is probably the weakest area of the Mach 5, those kind of short all-out reps where you're pushing for very fast race paces, that kind of thing. And that is actually one area where the Hyperion Max comes in and does a very good job, because it is so lightweight and nimble, and it feels a little bit more agile on the foot than the Hoka Mach 5, which is a bit more boat-like and comfortable, but not in a way that makes it hefty or cumbersome, but it is much more a smooth cruiser of a shoe compared to the Mach 5, which feels very poppy, light and nimble. The foam here is certainly firmer than on the Mach 5, but it gives you a nice bit of response, and that does help when you're going down for short reps on the track, which I did in this shoe recently, and it was really enjoyable. Like, you don't get the spring and propulsion like you get from a plated shoe from either of these shoes, but the way this is so nippy, has that little bit of a rocker, has that firmer foam in the midsole, just gives you a lot of pop when you are pushing for short reps. I think where it then loses out is over longer, harder runs, or even longer, easy runs. The Hyperion Max is a little bit less comfortable than the Hoka Mach 5. It's got that firmer feeling midsole, like I say, and doesn't roll through quite as smoothly. They're both rockered shoes, and actually looking at them, it's not really clear which is the more pronounced, but I get a much smoother rocker motion from the Hoka. Feels like I can really get into sync with it very easily. I don't get quite the same feeling from the Brooks. It's not quite as smooth the way it rolls through. Like, it's comfortable, but it's not as comfortable. I think this is more of a shoe that I would use for shorter runs, faster runs. It's pretty versatile, but if I was heading out for a 90-minute easy run, definitely the Mach 5 would be the shoe I'd want to use over it. And similarly, probably for longer tempo runs, I think I get on really well with the Mach 5 for those. The Brooks can do them really well, but I just don't enjoy the ride feel quite as much as with the Mach 5. So say both of them are really very versatile shoes for those who don't want to use plated trainers, but the ride feels a bit different. The Brooks leans a bit firmer, a bit poppier, better for shorter, fast stuff, whereas the Mach 5 is more comfortable, smoother, really good for longer training runs. One edge the Brooks is going to have is durability, and the grip hasn't been bad on the Mach 5, and the lack of an outsole is certainly actually part of its appeal. I think that's one of the reasons the ride feels so smooth and comfortable underfoot. At the same time, you can get more durability out of the Brooks. I think that's not just because of the outsole. I think it's also because the DNA Flash midsole foam is going to be a little bit more long-lasting than the dual density midsole you get on the Mach 5, which might just condense down a little bit quicker than the Brooks. Having used the original Hyperion Tempo for a long time, it really doesn't lose much of its response over time. These are both good shoes, but the Mach 5 is the one that fits me better as a runner. As someone who's usually training for marathons, usually my training errs towards the longer side of things, in that most of my runs I'll go out when I'm deep into marathon training. They'll all be over an hour, pushing around 10 miles, and this is the more comfortable shoe to do that kind of daily training in. When I'm looking at more shorter stuff, the Brooks Hyperion Max covers everything off really well, and I do think it has that little bit of edge if you're going to go for all-out speed work. And so those who prefer a firmer ride and a very consistent ride will enjoy the feeling of this DNA Flash foam, which is a little bit firmer than the midsole on the Mach 5, but it's not an uncomfortable firmness, I'd say that. The only time it would probably start to feel harsh if you were pushing it for a very long distance in the shoe. The Mach 5 would certainly be a more comfortable option, I'd say. I'd also say the Mach 5, I think, is the easier one to fit into a shoe rotation. Like, both of these are shoes without plates that lean towards faster training, but the Mach 5 is that bit more versatile at the easier end of things. And if you are happy to use a plated trainer, then those are better options. Things like the Saucony Endorphin Speed and the Puma Deviate Nitro 2 and Asics Magic Speed 2 are better options for fast training. So you could have the Mach 5 alongside those shoes in a rotation very comfortably, though, because this will just hoover up all of your easy work, your daily training, some of your tempo runs, long runs, and then you could use a plated trainer for faster sessions or races, that kind of thing. Whereas the Brooks, it really does do a similar job to those plated shoes for me. Like, it's not as versatile as the Mach 5 in terms of covering off those easy runs, and then when it comes to the faster runs, a plated trainer is a bit more effective, a bit more efficient, a bit more propulsive. So if you're using the Brooks, I think you're probably not using a plated trainer, which is fair enough. If you don't want to use one of those in your training, it is maybe the slightly better option of these two for speed work, and if that's how you're building your rotation, you just want a fast trainer, I think the Hyperion Max is a slightly better option, whereas the Mach 5 is the more versatile shoe to cover off a lot of daily training while still being pretty good at all that speed stuff as well. They are both quite versatile shoes, but they're probably lean. This one leans a bit more towards the shorter, faster stuff, and this leans more towards the longer, easy stuff. In terms of value, obviously the Hoka Mach 5 is the cheaper shoe, and if you can get it in a sale, then that's going to be a really big difference. If you can bring it down towards £100. Similarly, obviously the Brooks is quite expensive at RRP, and I'm not sure I'd go purely on value when looking at these two shoes, because I do think the Brooks is going to hold up better over time, not just because of the outsole, just because this foam is a little bit more longer lasting than the dual density midsole you're going to get on the Mach 5s. I think this has a nicer ride feel, but you might be looking more towards the lower end of that kind of 300, 500 mile bracket that people give for shoes, whereas I think with the Hyperion Max, it is going to last and last and last. The Hyperion Tempo just ran and ran and ran, and even if I pull it out of the garage now, it still feels pretty good.
Verdict for me then, and this is actually a closer call than I thought it would be between these two shoes. They're really both sort of very good shoes. They both can do a really good job. I think they have a place in a shoe rotation depending on what you're looking for. I think what really edges it for me though is just the versatility of the Mach 5. It can cope a little bit more with the kind of range of paces, a range of distances that I'm not sure the Brooks Hyperion Max kind of does quite so well. I do think we're talking, margins here, but for me it's just about edges the Mach 5. Price comes into it. I think the Mach 5 represents a bit more value for money, and I think it copes better with the full range of your daily training run, so you're going to get more use out of it if you're just looking for one shoe. That said, if you really are after a slightly firmer, more direct shoe that feels a bit more compact and takes care of business on shorter, faster runs and has a kind of arguably a better top speed, and then I think the Hyperion Max could be a better choice.
That's it. That's our comparison of the Hoka Mach 5 and the Brooks Hyperion Max, two of the best, I'd say, plateless, faster training shoes on the market. Let us know what you think in the comments below. Please do like and subscribe, ring the little bell, and we'll see you next time.